The only reason that the world economy is not in free fall right now is because of these absolutely unbelievable efforts on the part of central banks and governments to maintain some veneer of economic normalcy and growth. But they're running out of ammunition, and it's starting to fray around the edges. Sometime within the next few months, or at the longest couple of years, we're going to see a reversion to global financial crisis. When that happens, it's really important that we understand what's going on, and that there's no getting back to normal if we think of normal as being consumerism and economic growth. We're in a new territory here, and we're going to have to adapt quickly, and it's very important that we have good leadership and good ideas out there. So when people talk about dangerous ideas, this isn't a game. Mm-hmm. We're talking about really the survival of our society here, and it's extremely urgent. It's tough to ask businesses and households and so on to transition away from these magical substances. The problem is we have to. I mean, they're running out. They're getting more scarce and expensive. The price of oil has gone up dramatically just in the past 10 years, and it's only going to go higher because oil companies have to drill deeper and produce lower quality resources all the time. So we're going to have to bite the bullet and make the transition to a post-carbon future, whether we like it or not. And we'll do much better if we transition deliberately and consciously, rather than waiting for the last dribs and drabs of this stuff to poison the earth and make it impossible for us to make a transition. Well, of course we have to develop renewable sources of energy, solar and wind and hydropower, geothermal, wave power, on and on and on. But we shouldn't expect that these alternative sources of energy are going to enable our current consumeristic way of life to continue exactly the way it is. It's not going to. There are communities all around the world that are examples of what can be done when people get together to build local food systems, to share automobiles rather than everybody having to have their own, and so on. But one that I think is particularly instructive for this moment when world economic growth is shuddering to an end is the little nation of Bhutan in the Himalayas, which has been pioneering since the 1970s an alternative to GDP, gross domestic product. Now GDP is what's used by virtually every nation in the world as a measure of economic well-being and progress. GDP just measures how much money is spent in the economy, and it basically is a stand-in for consumption. As GDP goes up, we're consuming more, and that is considered to be better. That's our goal. If GDP is going up and we're consuming more, then everything's okay. If it's not, then we have a crisis and we have to turn it around. But of course, we can't continue consuming more. That's almost the essence of our problem. There are too many of us using too much too fast, and the earth is becoming exhausted. So we have to have another goal, and we have to have another set of measures to tell us how we're doing. So Bhutan has pioneered gross national happiness as a measure of well-being. So looking more directly at what it is that actually makes us happy, and GDP doesn't necessarily do so. We can increase our GDP and actually be more miserable. We've done that in industrialized countries over the past several decades. By most psychological measures, people are worse off than they were when we had a smaller GDP. So GDP is failing us. We can do better. And something like a genuine progress indicator or gross national happiness is going to be absolutely essential to getting us on track toward real progress, toward improving our lives, even as we consume less. Well, specifically, the Cuban food system adapted in a pretty reasonable way. Cuba had been depending upon cheap oil imports from the Soviet Union, and Cubans were using big Soviet tractors. They were actually using more fossil fuels per hectare than American farmers were. So Cuba had a highly industrialized and centralized food system that depended on enormous amounts of imported oil. So when the Soviet oil went away, this was a survival crisis for the Cuban food system. Now, prior to this time, there had been agronomists in Cuba who had been advocating a switch to organic production and toward decentralization. And those agronomists had been mostly marginalized. They weren't being listened to. But when the crisis came, Castro actually brought them into the palace and said, "Now, look, what would you do if you were in charge of the food system?" And they laid out the plan, and he said, "Okay, so go do it." And as a result, what Cuba did was build urban farms, educate a whole generation of young people about farming. So they trained lots of new farmers. They broke up the big collectives into smaller and in some cases more privatized farms. The Cuban diet changed. The Cubans lost on average about 20 pounds of body weight as a result of this special period, as they called it. But the health of the average Cuban actually increased during this period. Maybe a lesson for some of my obese American friends. And so in consequence, they were able to reimagine their food system and transition their food system in a direction that is actually a very good example for what the rest of the world is going to have to do as oil especially and the other fossil fuels become more scarce and expensive. I couldn't think of anything more important to do with my life than to do whatever I can to wake people up to what course we're on and what we can do and what the alternatives are. I didn't train to be a public speaker or a writer or anything else. I trained to be a classical violinist, and I love music, and nothing would make me happier than to, be in a professional string quartet and just go to rehearsals every day and play music for people. I mean, that would be a great way of life. But, if the world is coming apart around you, there may be some more important things to do, and that was the conclusion I came to.